Hey guys, it's Simon again. Woohoo! I came out not too long ago. There was a incident, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But I want to continue reading, so let's do it. Chapter one, we already did that. Chapter two, with my awesome flower. My bookmark. Okay. Chapter 2. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Prince Wendell wished they would stop. All that cheerfulness was annoying him, especially when he couldn't be outside enjoying the day. He put an elbow on the window of the carriage and leaned out. The forest beside him looked thick and lush, the light filtering, sorry, dyslexic, through the trees. There'd be lots of game in that forest, and he would so much rather be chasing it, even with a bow and arrow, or any other weapon for that matter, than he would like to be inside this carriage, heading to the hinterlands. He couldn't stand it anymore. He leaned his head back against the velvet seat. At least he didn't have to feel wood underneath him. This carriage was cushioned. In fact, the cushions were so thick a person could sleep on them as if they were a bed. The old royal carriage, the historic one, the one in the basement of the palace, had wooden seats and no padding at all. He wondered how his royal ancestors and their equally royal posteriors managed to survive rides like this one. Where exactly are we going? He managed to sound as disinterested as he felt. At least he resisted the urge to study his fingernails. His man, Giles, who had known Wendell since he was a baby, would have seen through that. To Beantown, sire, in the southwest corner of your kingdom. You are accepting the throne that the craftsmen there have made for your coronation. Giles was frowning at him anyway. A 70-year-old man frown had more power than a younger man's. Wendell would swear to it, and Giles always frowned when Wendell asked questions to which he should have known the answer. Fortunately, Wendell had Giles around to listen to all the chatter from the ministers. Yes, Wendell had been briefed about this trip. If I can turn the damn page. And no, Wendell hadn't paid attention. That was what Giles was for. Is it much further? And then, because Giles had seen through his restlessness anyway, Wendell added, "Can't we stop and go hunting?" "Very shortly, sire." Giles' mouth tightened around the edges, a small movement, one probably no one but Wendell noticed. The only reason Wendell had learned to see it was because it made Giles sound even more disapproving than usual. "We must make a brief stop at the Snow White Memorial Prison first." Hold on. Intermission. Wendell sighed. A prison. What a spectacular place to go on such a lovely day. Doom and gloom instead of sunshine and a quiet romp through the woods. He looked out the window again, only this time he leaned forward. The two spirited horses pulling the carriage had red plumes on the tops of their heads, and it looked as if the entire carriage was part of a parade, which it would be, of course, if there were anyone around to look at it. "I hate these outer provinces," he said. "The people are so common." Giles made that small face again. Wendell resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Giles hated it when Wendell dismissed his subjects like that. If Giles had had it his way, Wendell would have spent a year among them, getting his hands dirty in some sort of forced labor and bathing not at all. Your stepmother has applied for parole again," Giles was saying, "which we will, of course, turn down. This is simply a routine courtesy visit." The carriage rounded a corner. Some time ago, the forest had given way to manicured grounds. Wendell wasn't sure when. He wasn't even certain if they had gone through a small town. He had been staring at the horses, not at his surroundings. But now, he focused on them. Snow White Memorial Prison was shaped like an ancient palace, from the days when palaces doubled as fortresses. It had towering stone walls and a foreboding gray exterior. The grounds were rather lovely, but even that beauty was marred by the vulture that never seemed to leave the brown and white sign at the base of the property. The carriage followed the narrow road. Here, the bumps were so great that even Wendell's royal posterior, swaddled in cloth, cushioned on the finest velvet in the Ninth Kingdom, felt every single jolt. As they wound as they wound their way to a stop, Wendell glanced at Giles. Giles' frown was even deeper. Wendell was frowning too. The last time he had been here, and he had no idea how long ago that was, although Giles would probably know, there had been all sorts of people outside, waving and shouting and laughing. Then there had been the warden and the guards. They had stood in a grim semicircle farther inside the grounds, waiting to greet the prince and his entourage, such as it was. Today, there were no screaming people, no grim welcoming committee. Had Giles finally forgotten a date wrong? Well, this is marvelous, isn't it? The prince asked. Not exactly the red carpet treatment. I'm sure they haven't forgotten about our visit, Your Majesty, Giles said, although his tone belied his words. The carriage pulled to a stop in front of the drawbridge, which was down, and before Wendell could move, Giles had opened the carriage door. Oh, old man was angry. He would storm to the door, pound on it, and demand that Wendell get treated like the prince he was. Wendell did so like having Giles around. Giles was halfway to the door by the time Wendell got out of the carriage. He followed, a smile playing across his face. He would hardly wait for the confrontation. No one riled Giles without paying for it dearly. When Giles reached the large arched wooden doors, he grabbed the knocker and pounded so hard people probably heard the sound 3 kingdoms away. Wendell stopped beside Giles and worked very hard at keeping a serious expression on his face. Instead, he found himself looking around across the grounds and yawning. Giles glared at him. Wendell couldn't see the look, but he could feel it, then knocked again. The door opened. Wendell heard it more than he saw it. Then he turned towards Giles in time to see the old man stagger backwards. He was bleeding at the neck. His throat had been cut. Suddenly, Wendell was awake. He reached for Giles, but as he did so, someone grabbed his arm and yanked him inside. Wendell tried to pull himself free, but he couldn't. The grip on his arm was so extremely tight. The door closed behind him, and he had to blink to see what was happening in the gloom. He wasn't sure exactly what was going on, but he knew it involved trolls. He recognized the stink of them, the smell of old leather, sweat, and something rancid, like spoiled meat. That's disgusting. The hand let go of his arm, and he stepped forward, trying to get away. Then someone kicked him in the rear. He nearly fell, but he righted himself. He started to run, but someone punched him in the face. He fell backwards, was caught by heavy hands, and got kicked again. Wendell flailed with his elbows, but it did no good. He had at least 2 assailants, and they had to be trolls. One of them was as big as a house. Or so they say. They had half dragged, half kicked him down the corridor, punching him every time he put up a fight, which was all the time. Finally, they made it to the reception hall. The door was open. Wendell was about to shout for help when he was shoved inside. He sprawled on his belly and cringed as a boot headed for his face. He deflected the blow, but felt half a dozen others. As he moved this way and that, staggering up only to fall again, he caught a glimpse of the two beating him. One of them was fairly short for a troll. He didn't punch that hard either. The other one, the one who had some power behind her kicks, was female, with orange hair. Wendell focused on the gold ring hanging off her nose. If he could grab it, maybe he could get somewhere. Enough, said a female voice, a very familiar female voice. Since when do you give the orders? That was a male voice, and it wasn't familiar. The kicking stopped. Wendell got to his feet and resisted the urge to dust himself off. He stood at his full height, even though it didn't match the troll's, and as he looked toward the door, he got a sense of how much trouble he truly was in. The two trolls who had beaten him had gone to the door. They were now standing with two other trolls, male, tall and hideous, who flanked Wendell's stepmother, the queen. He was in trouble now. The entire 9 kingdoms were in trouble now, unless he could do something, but he didn't know what that something would be. Giles had warned him about traveling without an entourage, but had Wendell listened? Of course not. That was what Giles was for. Had been for. Oh dear. Wendell had to listen on his own now. What a fucking douche. You're a long way from your castle, Wendell. Perhaps you should have stayed there. The queen was smiling her secret little smile. He swallowed hard. He'd never forgotten that smile. You'll pay for this, he said, more to stall than anything else. If he had a moment, he was certain he would figure a way out of this. But the queen laughed. She had a soft laugh, but that only made it more menacing. On the contrary, I think you will beg at my feet for food. Only then did he notice the dog beside her. It was large and golden and had strange eyes. They seemed to be brighter than a dog's eyes should be. Do you know what this is? She asked, stroking the dog. It's a very special kind of dog. Magical. I hope you like dogs, Wendell. You're going to spend the rest of your life as one. She bent down as she said that last. And let go of the dog. It bounded towards Wendell. He tried to back away, but the dog reached him and put its paws on his chest. Wendell raised his arms in a gesture of surrender. Damn her. She'd known how much he hated dogs when he suddenly felt quite loose inside his own body. It was as if he wasn't attached to his own skin anymore. He was shrinking, and the room had grown dimmer. It had also gotten louder. His perspective had shifted. He had been staring at his stepmother, and now he was looking at his own sash. How did that happen? He glanced up and saw his own face. Only his tongue was out, the way a dog's would be, and his front arms were cocked and bent like those of a dog standing on its hind legs. Oh no, he didn't like this at all. He glanced down and saw that his own hands were feet. Hairy feet. Golden, hairy feet. Come, come, Wendell, the queen said in a tone that had a motherly chiding behind it. You don't greet people on all fours, do you? You'll never get away with this, Wendell said, or tried to say. Instead, he barked. You know, I do think he's trying to tell us something, the queen said. The trolls applauded. Wendell shook his head, felt his ears flap against his skull, and something move around his royal posterior. He glanced over his golden, hairy shoulder. He had a tail. He really was the dog. The trolls were laughing and applauding. The real dog, who looked for all intents and purposes like the prince, did he really have such curly blonde hair and such a goofy expression on his long face? Or was that the function of the magic, the dog, and the queen's maliciousness? was exploring his face with his hands. He swayed on his feet as if he weren't used to balancing on two legs. The queen's smile had faded. "Grab him!" she ordered. One of the taller trolls hurried towards Wendell. Those creatures could move fast. The troll reached for Wendell, and Wendell did the only thing he could. He bit those stubby, pale, filthy fingers. They tasted like they smelled. That's disgusting. "Ow!" the troll cried and pulled away. Wendell resisted the urge to spit. He wheeled around, nearly getting tangled in all four limbs, and ran from the room. It was easier to run on all fours as a dog than it was as a human. It only took him a moment to get into the loping stride. The tail was throwing off his balance, but he bet he could get used to that too. He veered into a corridor and was scampering down it when he heard the queen shout, "Stop him!" Wendell cursed, and the sound came out as a growl. There was an awful lot to get used to in this dog body, not to mention trying to outthink the nastiest woman in the kingdoms while he tried to make his escape. And, to make matters worse, he had a hunch he was going deeper into the prison instead of getting out of it. And he didn't even want to think about trying to open doors. If he could apologize to Giles, he would. This was not the kind of hunting Wendell had had in mind. Who would have thought wimpy Wendell would be this much trouble? The queen narrowed her eyes as Wendell's tail disappeared into a darkened corridor. And, to make matters worse, the smelly trolls she was stuck with weren't as swift as she wanted them to be. "We'll get him," Burley shouted. "He's not going anywhere." "He can't escape," Blabberwort said. "It's a prison." Oh, wonderful. Pronouncements, and obvious ones at that. The queen was about to push them from the room when all four trolls took off, limbs flailing. If Wendell had any sense at all, he would be able to keep them busy for hours. And Wendell had just proven to have a lot more sense than she had ever given him credit for. She turned toward the dog prince, who was still looking at himself with wonder. Apparently, Wendell had been smarter than any animal. The look on the dog prince's face was definitely a lot dimmer in the intelligence department. How come she hadn't noticed Wendell's brains before? Probably because he had always played spoiled heir to the throne to perfection. "Well," she asked the dog prince, "do you have anything to say for yourself, your highness?" The prince glanced over his shoulder slowly, then growled, "Where's my tail gone?" An involuntary sound of disgust escaped her. She had had a very small hope of sending the dog prince after Wendell, but that obviously wouldn't work. Instead, she would need other help. She clutched the keys she had lifted from the Troll King, delicately, not because she thought he would notice, but because she really didn't want to touch his leather and suede coat, and walked back into the prison proper. She avoided her old corridor, the one that led to maximum security, and instead went toward the cells. As the inmates saw her, they shouted at her to let them out. Some hung near the bars, others reached for her as she passed. They were a motley bunch, scarred and hideous looking, but without any real strength. Bulky, burly men didn't run well. She needed someone with speed, agility, and cunning. Not that she would find anyone like that here. Anyone with speed, agility, and cunning should have been able to outrun the king's horses and all the king's men. Then she smiled. The only king the 9 kingdoms would have would be a dog. She was about to give up when she saw a flash of dark hair, of intelligent eyes, and a narrow, handsome face that somehow made her think of wolf-like cunning. Speed, agility, and cunning. How perfect. "You," she said. The man came closer. He was slender and moved with the kind of quickness she was looking for. He grinned at her, and there was a bit of the rake in that smile. "Hello," he said, a melodious voice, deep and rich, the kind of voice a man should have. She raised her chin slightly. He was charming, too, and knew how to use it. This was more than a human male. This was something else. "What are you?" she asked. "Me?" He raised his eyebrows as if he couldn't believe the question. "A very, very fine chap, falsely in prison on a trumpled up. Do not make me ask again," she said. She knew she was more than that. She knew he was more than that. His gaze caught hers. Apparently, he realized that she was not someone to be trifled with. His eyes changed, flared green for a moment, and then returned to normal. "I'm a half-wolf." She unlocked the cell door, but hung on to it to show him her control. "If I let you out, you must serve me without question." He grinned. "Breakfast, lunch, dinner, I'll serve you anything. I'm your wolf. Loyalty is my middle name." She let go of the door and took a step toward him. His grin faded, and he stopped babbling. She looked at him, stared at him, and his eyes went flat, the way an animal's did while it tried to figure out the best way to deal with its fear. "Give your will to me," she used her power voice. Still, that flat look. He wouldn't be an easy one to convince. "Be mine, to summon and control, whenever I call on you." For a moment, she thought he was going to say no. Then he blinked, looked away, and nodded. Now she was the one who smiled. He was hers, and she knew that no matter how smart Wendell was, he lacked cunning. He could never outrun a human wolf. Dun, dun, dun. So that is the end of chapter 2. We are about 22 pages done. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, give me a like. If you want more, leave a comment. If you want to see more of my stuff, you can subscribe. It's all up to you. But I'll see you later. Bye.